Hi, good afternoon. My name is Christie Slape. I am the Texas ambassador for Moms for Liberty. Has anyone heard of Moms for Liberty? Yes? How many Charlie Kirk fans do we have here? Yeah. Charlie Kirk said that Moms for Liberty is his favorite hate group. How about that? And when he said that, he said it with all the love in his heart. We actually were called a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, who is a radical leftist group who thinks Focus on the Family and Moms for Liberty are hate groups. So we love it that Charlie had some humor when it came to Moms for Liberty. I live up the road in Round Rock, Texas, in Williamson County, and in my own community, I have seen some radical indoctrination of our kids in our schools. So as a parent, I wanted to fight against that, from masks to gender ideology to social emotional learning and data collection, all of these things that I now know are problematic for our kids, but we have a lot of people in our communities, in our state, that have no idea what kinds of information is being fed to our kids in their local schools. So we are fighting for their survival of America by unifying, educating, and empowering parents to defend their parental rights at all levels of government. So in our school districts, we want to endorse school board members that stand for our values. At the state capitol, we endorse and promote the bills that defend parental rights and that get the explicit material out of our school libraries. So we're fighting for that. Thank y'all. I know many of you in this room have been doing the same thing, and I appreciate that so much. I'd like to see a quick show of hands. How many of you have said, "What is wrong with the youth in America?" Raise your hand if you've ever said that. Right, pretty much everybody. Has anybody said, "What are they teaching these kids in school today?" Right, yes, me too. How many people have said kids need to be learning how to read, not how many genders there are, right? Yeah. How many of you, on the other hand, have said, "Our schools are fine, we don't have any issues, all's good"? Anyone? You are an educated bunch, because the reality is every school district, whether it's rural or in the city, has the books that it's embarrassing to read them. They're terrible. There's social emotional learning getting into the minds of the kids. The teachers are leading these social emotional circles, and they're really hired to teach math. It is insane. So what we want to do as Moms for Liberty is get our community on the county level joining our chapters and educating you once a month on the issue so that you can go to your school board meetings, you can listen, know what to hear for, and then you can get in there and talk to the administrators and find out how to fight the policies that are the woke policies that are leading our children down the wrong path. We have kids being indoctrinated. They need to be learning how to read. They need to be learning how to do math, and they need a civics education. How can they read the Constitution of the United States of America if they don't even know how to read? So these are important issues to us. If you're a mom or a grandmother, could I ask you to stand up? Would you mind? It's a good little stretch break. Moms and grandmas, you are the nurturers and the encouragers. Yes, please applaud. We love moms. I'm a mom of 4 kids. My mom died years ago, but I know if she were alive today, she would be fighting right now to get this stuff out of our kids' school. So all of you who stood up, thank you. If you would please come over to my booth, it's right across from the bathrooms and the coffee. I want you to fill out this white card and just say, "I support parental rights, I support Moms for Liberty, and I want to get involved." We would love that. Now, if you're a dad or a grandpa, would you stand up too, please? Dads and grandpas? You are the leaders. You are so important in the lives of kids, and we need you too. Mom, thank you. You can sit down. Moms for Liberty is not just for moms. We were started by 2 moms in Florida. We are in 48 states across the country, but we need dads to join with us too, to go to those school board meetings and stand up for children and for the rights of parents that come from God and not from the government, right? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next panel. They have been working really hard on some issues that have been important to us in Moms for Liberty: Save Women's Sports and the Texas Women's Privacy Act. We endorsed those bills, and we are so happy to see that they have passed. I'd like to introduce Paula Scanlan, Amie Ichikawa, John Paulton, Mary Elizabeth Castle, and Megan Flanakin. Come on up.
All right, well, has everyone been having a really great time today? Yeah. Well, I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is this is our last panel. However, the good news is this is not a discussion you want to miss, so thank you all for still being here. I know it's been a long day, but I know this is definitely going to be worth it. So I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and before I do that, if you don't know me yet, my name's Megan Flanakin. I'm the Strategic Policy Associate for Texas Values, and it's my honor today to be the moderator for our next panel. So I want to start with Mary Elizabeth Castle. We have our very own Director of Government Relations on this panel. She is the Director of Government Relations for Texas Values, the largest statewide policy organization focusing on faith, family, and freedom in Texas. As Director of Government Relations, she works daily with the Texas Values team, legislators, and their staff at the Texas Capitol to ensure pro-family values are protected. Mary Elizabeth has been published in the Daily Signal for her work on protecting children and is a contributor to the pro-life publication Society of St. Sebastian, where she's been awarded the honor of both fellow and academic fellow. Mary Elizabeth has been invited to speak at venues across the state of Texas and the United States, including the Texas GOP Convention, the National Pro-Life Women's Conference, and Women's Declaration International. She was the 2023 recipient of the Freedom Award from the Christian conservative group Texas Minority Coalition. Can we just give it up for Mary Elizabeth? Next, we have Paula Scanlan. She is a, one second. Next, we have Amie Ichikawa. Amie is an ambassador at Independent Women's Forum and Independent Women's Voice. She is one of the founders of Woman to Woman, a nonprofit organization providing re-entry services, parole hearing prep, and advocacy for safety and dignity of incarcerated women in California. Ichikawa co-founded this nonprofit after her own incarceration at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla for 5 years. She maintains contact with women in the Central California Women's Facility and California Institution for Women, serving as their advocate. She's in partnership with IWF as an ambassador and is blowing the whistle on how behind bars incarcerated women are sitting ducks, vulnerable to violence at the hands of biological males who enter into prisons identifying as transgender women. Next, we have Mr. John Paulton. He's the Vice President of the State Alliances for FPA, Family Policy Alliance, serving and equipping our nationwide alliance of state family policy organizations. Mr. Paulton has extensive experience in both public policy and politics, especially at the state level, as he has directed lobbying and election work in dozens of states. And since 2001, when he joined Focus on the Family and subsequently Family Policy Alliance, he worked in tandem with countless policymakers and concerned citizens in establishing and equipping state family policy organizations around the country. Prior to 2001, John served as Executive Director of Family Policy Group in South Dakota for 8 years. Under his direction, the organization enjoyed particular success in the legislative arena, passing several pro-family measures that were among the first of their type in the nation. For this work, he was honored by the FRC Family Research Council with its Faith, Family, and Freedom Award. Thank you so much for being here. Last but certainly not least, we have Paula Scanlan. Paula is here. She has her own story to share about having to share a swimming team with the one and only Will Thomas. So we're so excited to have you here. All right, well, I want to go ahead and get into our questions a little bit. I want to start with Paula and Amie. Paula, can you start, and then we'll go over to you, Amie. Can you two share your stories of how this issue has impacted you personally, why it was so important to you, and why you felt the need to get more involved?
Yeah, definitely. First, I'm so grateful to everyone for being here, and I know this is the last panel, so hopefully we'll finish out strong here. But if you aren't familiar, I was a swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, and in my experience, I was a normal college athlete, and suddenly in 2019, at the beginning of my sophomore year, a member of the men's team by the name of William Thomas, who's actually coincidentally from Austin, Texas area, so a little bit of a personal connection to where we are right now, but he announced to all of us that he was going to transition to the women's team, and there was no room for questions. We were told that we had to accept him on our women's team and that we must refer to him with she, her pronouns. Once this happened, he was part of the women's team just like anyone else. He had a locker next to everyone else, and in this, he went on and won an NCAA championship where he bumped out Olympic medalists were second, third, and fourth place finishers to him. It was absolutely maddening. And worst of all, what a lot of people don't realize, and what you guys at Texas Values have realized, is that it wasn't just unfair athletically that this was happening. He was in our locker room 18 times per week undressing in front of us women. And every time we went to the athletic department to try to raise our concerns about the situation, they told us we were hateful, we were bigoted. If we ever spoke out against it, we would regret it. We would never be able to find a job. And the last thing that they told us, they said, if you still have an issue with undressing in a locker room with this fully grown, fully intact male, you have a psychological issue. Please go seek a counselor. And they referred us to psychological services. So that is the layers of why this issue really was just so much bigger than even women's sports, and why even here in Texas, we've done such a wonderful job of passing women's sports legislation. I was so grateful, actually. You guys invited me a couple of years ago now to sit with Governor Abbott when he signed this. And then you went a step further and talked about advocating for women's privacy and other acts to help protect women, because it doesn't end at sports. And that's where Amie will get into more about where this goes deeper. And Amie's story is something I actually talk about a lot, so I'll let her tell you guys. But that's really how I got here. And what it comes down to is we all know what a woman is, and we deserve to be protected. And we deserve we deserve to have our own sports, and we deserve to have locker rooms and private spaces free from male individuals that can potentially harm us and otherwise should not be there. So that's really it. But again, I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you guys really all for being here and listening.
So I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago that I first met Paula, and I heard her story, and I realized that the same evil that justifies housing fully intact, operational, mostly sex offender men in women's prison is the same evil that justified allowing a man to be naked in front of her and her teammates 18 times a week. This is the same demonic spirit of female erasure. This is about silencing us and making sure that we're not here anymore. They don't want us around. I personally spent 5 years in a California state prison where they did allow convicted serial rapists to transfer into women's general population because he self-identified as a female. He did at one point try and mutilate himself to make it more convincing for the committee to transfer him in. But I was in the prison on a different yard, and it still had a huge negative impact on myself and all of my roommates, everybody in the unit, just knowing that we had been completely abandoned by the state of California, by the state legislature. How could they let a fully intact male sex offender live in our general population, knowing that 92% of us are survivors of some kind of sexual abuse? And the women that I was in prison with, that I was blessed to get to know, really taught me how to stop hating myself, taught me how special it really is to be a woman. So I can't imagine doing anything but fighting to make sure that they're in a space that is free of fully intact males. In 2021, I did start my organization, Woman to Woman, and it was with the purpose of providing reentry services for women, helping them, with the daily activities. When you do 5, 10, 15, 20, even 40 years in prison, it's hard to come home, especially when you left using a rotary phone. So it's the little things that we wanted to help with, but at the same exact time, the implementation of our gender self-ID policy started in California, and I started getting hundreds of phone calls and letters a day from women I'd never even met before that were in complete distress. So that's when I shifted gears and really made this my main thing. This is my mission, and I can't stop until women are back in women's prisons again.
Well, I want to turn to Mary Elizabeth for a minute. On the Texas side of things, can you give the audience a little bit of insight into the history of both of these laws and why Texas Values found it so important to fight for this at the Texas Capitol?
Absolutely. Texas Values has been on the forefront of protecting women and girls in sports in their private spaces for even the beginning of this organization. You can go back all the way to the HERO Ordinance in Houston. Some of you may remember Mayor Anise Parker. She was the first LGBT mayor, I believe, in the country. And she was the champion, and I hate to say champion, but she was the force behind this policy called the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, which would basically force boys and men into women and girls spaces publicly all over the city of Houston. And Texas Values was the main organization standing up against this HERO ordinance in Houston, and it was defeated. And I believe we can't, yes, and that was all due to the advocacy led by Jonathan Saenz. And also, in addition to that, we have to memorialize and celebrate the life of Pastor Dave Welch, who led the pastors in Houston to come out against that terrible policy and really led to that success in defeating the HERO ordinance. But it did not stop there. So some of you may remember the Obama administration. The second term was probably the most radical term if you want to compare the two terms of President Obama. And in his second term in 2014, he actually released what was called a Dear Colleague letter. And to explain that, a Dear Colleague letter is basically a policy statement. It's not law because it's not passed by Congress, but it's him kind of unilaterally saying, you must follow this policy. So he wrote a Dear Colleague letter to basically all K through 12 schools, and I believe universities as well, saying that boys and girls, you can't use the term male and female. And also when it came to private spaces, you had to allow any student to go where they chose. Right after that, we saw how it impacted Texas directly. You would have thought some schools maybe on the West Coast would follow that, but unfortunately Texas did listen to that, and of all places, Fort Worth, Texas actually had their own policy where they would allow boys into girls' spaces and even girls' sports. And so that was another policy where Texas Values went up to Fort Worth and fought that policy. Unfortunately, I believe that it did pass, but that was another policy where they just directly took what was in the Dear Colleague letter, and it said, we're not going to use the term boy or girl, and basically you can go to the restroom, locker room, shower of your choosing in our schools. But that's when, in 2016, when that happened in Fort Worth, that was the impetus, the force behind 2017, especially for Texas Values, for saying that we're going to make sure in the state of Texas we have a law that prohibits this, because you had things happening all over the country. You had the NCAA actually pulled out the championships for the basketball tournament in North Carolina because they actually had a law protecting female spaces. But Texas in 2017 said that they were going to pass a law. It was known as Senate Bill 2 at that time. And there was a lot of force behind that. You know, I remember watching the videos that Texas Values had on their website of Shiloh Satterfield. We had this 9-year-old girl who was going to the state capitol with her father and testifying in front of committees saying, you know, even I don't let my brother at home go into the restroom. And, you know, we brought those people to the Capitol, but 2017 was pretty tough because we had the business community back then it wasn't cool to stand up for women's rights, you could say, because you had the business community really coming out against that bill in 2017. So ever since then, it's been a fight. So in 2017, the Privacy Act unfortunately did not pass. They maligned it with this term called the bathroom bill, and that's what the other side continued to call it for 2019, 21, even up until today, calling it the bathroom bill. But we got to this point just by making sure that we kept the momentum and we kept the pace. And I really think that the work that was done on the sports issue and just so many stories coming to light, like Amie's story, is what really got us over the finish line. So that's a little bit of the history of how Texas Values has really been leading the way. Every session coming back with some form of the Privacy Act and then finally getting success in this 2025 session.
Well, and one more cool thing about that before we move on, but I think you mentioned Shiloh Satterfield, and she actually came back to the Capitol this year to help continue to pass this legislation. So I think it's just really cool to be able to say that someone that testified at a very young age came back and was still passionate about the issues, because that's the kind of work we do at Texas Values. Okay, moving on, I want to go to John. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your role at the Family Policy Alliance and FPA's role in helping states pass laws protecting women's sports and private spaces? And then can you give us any insight into where other states are on this issue as well?
Well, sure, thank you. Great to be with you all. I'm from Colorado Springs, so it's nice to be down in red country again. Family Policy Alliance began as Focus on the Family Action back in 2004 to be the political and policy arm of Focus on the Family. I had been on the Focus on the Family team for a few years at that point. It was very exciting. About a decade later, we spun out for strategic reasons to be able to do more around the country, and we became Family Policy Alliance. We took with us the mantle of hosting and serving this network of 40 state family policy councils around the country, of which Texas Values is one of the great ones. And it's a privilege to be able to work with Texas Values, yes, and all of the other groups around the country. Our first engagement in the girls' sports issue was in 2016. There were just a handful of reports of some things happening around the country. There was a track athlete up in Alaska. There were a couple of athletes in Connecticut that eventually became a court case. And we started thinking about getting involved in it. My own daughter, who's actually here today, she lives in Round Rock now, she was on a basketball team for Christian school and had to face a male athlete on another team. We started thinking about getting involved in this. It seemed a little strange because we didn't get involved in sports issues. But of course, it's so much more than a sports issue. It's the impact on these young ladies. I mean, what you talked about, Paula, the impact, the practical impact on young ladies' lives. But it was also a great, we felt like it pulled back the curtain on the LGBT movement. We get told you got to be tolerant, but this was exposing the reality of it, that this was a practical, everyday thing. People could understand men should not be competing against women's sports. So we dove into it in a big way. A couple of years later, I was up in Idaho for an extensive time and started working with a name some of you will know, especially up here, Representative Barbara Ehart, who has been a leader on this. She was beginning to work on trying to get the first language, and so we spent a lot of time working on that. It didn't come to fruition in 2019 in time, but in 2020, she ran and passed that bill. We were on the ground there, and it was the first state then to protect girls' sports. Then we began to work with our other state groups around the country. In most states, it was the State Family Policy Council that was the boots on the ground, with a lot of help from other national groups to help get these passed. To date, you asked about the numbers around the country. To date, 27 states have passed legislation and signed into law or overridden a veto to protect girls and women's sports. That is worthy of a clap for sure. And 2 other states have passed it administratively. So 29 states have some kind of protections. 5 of those states are subject to court restrictions right now, but I think we'll get around to that. there's a court case in the works that hopefully will change that as well.
That's awesome. Well, I want to stay with you for a second, John, and I think it's fair to say that Texas, as a large state, has quite the impact on the entire country. How do you think the fact that Texas has now passed a safe women's sports law and a Texas Women's Privacy Act, how do you think that that's going to continue to impact the rest of the states?
Well, have you heard of the term Bigfoot? Texas doing that is enormous. And I remember when we were first dealing with this, and there was the pushback, especially on the college front, with the NCAA, because a lot of states were concerned that, well, if we do it, then we won't get the regional or national NCAA tournaments in our state. The more states that began to pass it, the less that carried weight. And of course, eventually the NCAA buckled on the issue fairly recently. With Texas doing this now, that really pushes that completely over the top. That's just has an enormous impact on the rest of the country.
That's great. Okay, I want to go back to Mary Elizabeth for a minute. One of the things our organization does to make an impact on lawmaking is bringing people to the Texas Capitol who have been affected by the issues that we're talking about today to share their own stories with the lawmakers. Can you share a little bit about how we are able to bring women to the Capitol for this issue and just walk alongside them through the process?
Absolutely. I mean, these are, friendships, relationships we were able to make with these people who were telling their true stories. Just like the panel we had earlier of mom and daughter, talking about how they're affected by the Texas Women's Privacy Act. It's so important that when you have any issue at the state capitol, that you're bringing in a voice that's relevant, because all the time the other side will say, it's not really happening. And we even had that happen on the floor recently with the Texas Women's Privacy Act. A local legislator, I won't name his name, brought up a story, an incident that happened in Round Rock ISD where young ladies had to change in a locker room after band practice with the male student. And now we have all the evidence of it. We did the open records request. We spoke with the mom. We know it's real. But this legislator just tried to dismiss it and say, I just think it's false, it's debunked. So it's so important that you have real life stories, these voices amplified at the Texas Capitol, because the other side, first of all, is going to say, this isn't happening, this isn't real. But secondly, some of you may be familiar with, just logic or doing public speaking. They talk about the ethos, the pathos, the logos. We all know what we believe as truth and what we believe in our biblical values. And then we know sometimes the statistics and the talking points, but you have to have that pathos, that emotional appeal that can really move the legislators, because we can do the research. We definitely do that at Texas Values. We have our statistics. We have our ethos. We believe that this is God's truth, but we also need to bring some of that emotional appeal, that real life experience, in order to really influence people at the state capitol.
Well, Amie, you were one of the people that did come to the Capitol to testify on the Texas Women's Privacy Act. Can you share a little bit about how that went and what your experience was at the Capitol?
Well, it's always a pleasure to be able to serve Texas in any way. Anything to get out of the state of California, even if it's just for a couple of days, is a gift from God. Speaking at the Texas Capitol is so different than going to Sacramento. I don't want to cry. Being in a state that not only believes in Jesus, but still loves Jesus is so refreshing. Being able to tell the truth in the state capitol without having eggs thrown at you is so awesome. Being able to have so much support and so much kindness extended when I come from a state where my own peers, people that I was in prison with, are standing behind me telling the governor that I'm a liar. And they get paid really well to do it. It's an amazing team effort. I mean, I can't thank Texas Values enough for the hospitality, especially Mary Elizabeth. Every time I see her, she's 10 steps ahead of the game. She's on it, and to be able to work with such a dedicated team that's really participating in landmark bills that are leading the nation in the right direction is such an honor. I would love to live in Texas once I feel the Lord's released me from my responsibilities in California. I can't imagine, really going anyplace else, but it's really awesome every time I'm here. And to be able to participate in something positive that is actually leading to action, that's getting the men out of girl sports, that's getting the men out of the women's prisons, is so fulfilling. And I feel like my cup is filled every time I come here, because it's definitely getting dried up regularly in California. So thank you, guys.
Well, whenever you're ready, we'll take you in Texas. Speaking of Texas, Paula, you have family here in Texas, I know. How does it feel to be back in Texas, where you have personal ties, and see Texas moving forward with powerful legislation?
Yeah, well, first, I see my aunt and uncle over there, so I'm just gonna say hello, they're waving. So something that always comes up to me, and we are a United States of America, we are. But we also have great state loyalty, whether you're from a blue state or a red state. I mean, people are always asking you, where are you from? And saying the United States of America is simply not a good enough answer. And so when we work on legislation and we work on all these different issues, it does feel a little bit strange at times to work on things for states that you don't have ties to or you don't have family in. And so I have felt a little bit of that when I go to a state that I don't know anything about, and I feel, oh, am I out of place here? Or I have no, loyalty to this state. But when I was first reached out by you guys a couple of years ago to work on things in Texas, I said, absolutely, I will be doing it. And not only will I be doing it, I get a great trip that I get to go see some family during. And it truly is every single event that I've ever been invited to by Texas Values, I have been able to stay with family, see family. And so it's something I'm so, so grateful for. And I think really what it comes down to is I'm more than grateful that you guys have done such great work for a state that's protecting people that I care so much about. And so that's why... that's again why I'm just beyond grateful really for all the work that you guys have done here. And I think that Texas is one of the largest states in this country, and it's a very important one. And I think that the leadership in this state is something all states should look to. You guys have gone above and beyond on this women's sports legislation, truly. I mean, I can't even explain how grateful I am for it and how much I want it in my own state. Unfortunately, my state is one of the 23 states that does not have legislation in women's sports. And so I see that fight uphill, and I see how challenging it is to get this stuff done in the country. But again, I really love you guys so much. I'm so grateful to be here. And again, I honestly, maybe I also need to move to Texas, but there's still, work to be done in other states, so.
That's a great answer. Okay, I want to go back to Mary Elizabeth for a minute. One other thing I wanted to bring up is you led our effort to create a coalition of other partnership organizations that cared about this issue. Can you explain a little bit about how Texas Values was able to take the lead on that and why we felt it was so important as an organization?
Certainly. It's very important to have a team, even outside your team, in order to get legislation passed at the Texas Capitol. And we do this with a number of bills that we do pass at the Texas legislature. But, even with the Save Women's Sports issue, it was important even in the interim. Senator Paxton talked about the interim yesterday. Even before session, getting our friends, our allies, Independent Women's Forum, even Family Policy Alliance, making sure we have our team across the state and across the country to provide a number of things of support. Even if it's moral support, getting on a Zoom call and just telling them what's going on, and even calling Joseph and saying, this is happening and what is your advice? But making sure that we have a coalition of people. So whenever that legislative hearing is happening, we already know we can count on 20 or 30 people who are coming to the Texas Capitol to testify. And not only that, if we're going to have a press conference or a rally showing people that other organizations, other individuals support this particular issue, whether it's Save Women's Sports or women's privacy, and sometimes just a number of things, besides just showing up. Sometimes we're partnered with organizations that provide legal advice, like Alliance Defending Freedom. Some have statistics, like IWF has been very helpful with that. And some other organizations actually have experienced lobbying in their state, and they can tell us pitfalls that they faced in their state when they've argued certain issues. So it's great to have friends all across the state, all across the country, and it's their benefit too. So it's a mutual relationship, making sure that they feel involved in the process. You have Moms for Liberty. They want to feel like they're involved in the process and have a say in it. And so we're very happy that we can be the one to say, okay, let's all meet once a week and get together so you can know what's happening on your rights and these important issues at the state capitol.
That's great. Well, Paula, I want to go to you now. You've been involved in this issue on a national scale, like you've mentioned. What's it been like working on this issue, not only at the state level, but the national level as well?
Yeah, this issue has been something that's been just so many different things. I honestly, when I first went through this experience, and again, this started back in 2019, and he joined our team back in 2021. That was 4 years ago at this point, which is really wild to think about. But we've seen this happen to girls across the country. When I first was in this situation, I had convinced myself this was something that was really out of the ordinary and was not happening wide scale in this country, but I found that it was. And so something we used to talk about in this campaign cycle, getting Trump elected back in 2024, this issue came up in every single rally that Trump spoke at. Every single speaker gave a little shout out saying, and I don't want men and women's sports. And it became incredibly effective for many voters in this country. It flipped a lot of votes, it changed a lot of minds, and it was something that was never talked about before this past election cycle. And so, again, it was really a big thing federally. And then we went on, Trump wins the election, as you guys all know, and he kept this promise. He ends up, within 3 weeks of being in office, signing an executive order to keep men out of women's sports. And that was a really wonderful experience. I was actually fortunate to be there standing behind him while he did this, and a day I will never forget. Unfortunately, we have some issues passing it through the Senate, which they were unable to do. It did pass the House with 2 Democrat votes, by the way, which I thought to be a good thing, but then I realized there's still 200 plus Democrats that believe men belong in women's sports, which is, they need some help figuring that one out. I think every person with common sense can disagree, but it's something we still have to deal with, and who's to say in a couple of years, someone else doesn't win the election that wants to take this executive order back, which if a certain party wins, they will do. This is why we need it in state legislation. This is why the work that was done here in Texas is so important, and why the work that you guys work so hard. We need to duplicate you and send you to all other 49 states in this country to do it as well. We truly do. No one did it like you guys. So that's why it's so important. And again, keep it up. I have nothing but amazing things to say about you guys as an organization, the people of Texas. Thank you for having common sense and for caring about us women and listening to my story, really. I just appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Paula. John, there's a Supreme Court case on the Safe Women's Sports Law. Not our law, but another state that passed that law. Family Policy Alliance is involved with it, and I know that Texas Values signed on to an amicus brief in support of the law. We've had a number of victories at the Supreme Court in recent years. Do you feel like we're in a position where we can expect a success?
I think we have good reason to be very hopeful, but we should be in prayer about that case. It's the Hecox versus Little case, which comes out of Idaho, but was also linked to a West Virginia case. So 2 cases. The Hecox versus Little case, that challenges that law that I mentioned earlier, that very first law passed by Representative Barbara Ehart in Idaho. She is the lead amicus on that brief. Brian could tell me how to say that. On an amicus brief written by our the Family Policy Council, your sister groups in Kansas and Minnesota, representing Family Policy Alliance, our 40 state groups. Most of all, Representative Ehart and dozens of female state legislators around the country. So we're excited about that brief before the U.S. Supreme Court. But please do be in prayer. There's lots of encouragement why we can be successful in this case, but we can't take anything for granted. Let's pray that that is successful.
All right, we are basically out of time at this point, but really quickly, could everyone just let the audience know how they can stay in touch with you and your work? Starting with Mary Elizabeth.
Sure. If you want to learn more about this issue, go to protectwomen'sprivacytexas.com. You also have SaveWomenSportsTexas.com for the Save Women's Sports issue. And when it comes to our law that we talked about yesterday, HB 229, you can go to Texas Knows What a Woman Is, which is a microsite that you can access through txvalues.org. And I did want to share one last story very quickly. I was talking to Governor Abbott's team about the Texas Women's Privacy Act and how we passed this. And his senior advisor actually has a background related to boxing. And he told me that he used an analogy that they use in boxing to compare how we passed the Texas Women's Privacy Act. And he said, the pressure breaks the pipes. And he believes that over the years, like the pressure of everything that's happened to people like Paula, Amie, everyone else, all the persistence of our organization has broken the pipes on this issue. So that was very encouraging to hear that from Steve Munisteri.
Very cool. Paula?
Yeah, you guys can just maybe follow me on X or something. I'm Paula Y. Scanlan. That's usually where I'm posting things. I don't know. I'm just advocating where I can about this issue, and when things come up, I'll go testify in some states. But for now, I feel like that's all you can really do. But thank you really just for being here. That's the support that I really need. So thank you.
I highly recommend that you take a minute to visit YouTube and check out Independent Women Voices, Cruel and Unusual Punishment, The Invasion of Women's Prisons. It's a short docuseries. There's stories from women that are still in prison, women who have recently paroled, and my story as well. And you can check out my own organization at www.womaniiwoman.org. That's womaniiwoman.org. I like Roman numerals. Thank you.
Well, yes, great. Two things for me. One is you can go to familypolicyalliance.com for a host of resources. I won't detail them all. But number two, and the reason I'm here, support Texas Values. They are our allied group in Texas, and as you've already heard, they're doing fantastic work representing you at the state capitol. So when they say jump, ask how high, and support their work. Thank you.
Thank you for that shout out. All right, well, thank you all for being here today and having this discussion with us. This is an incredibly important issue, and we're so excited to have both of these laws passed in Texas. Can you all give it up for our panelists today?